Welcome to the May 2022 Architectural Series guest speaker of NORR Ed. I'm Andrew Schmidt, principal at the Toronto office and a Canadian NORR Ed leader. Our guest speaker today will be joining us from Toronto, Siamak Hariri. NORR Ed is a continuing education program founded by NORR 15 years ago. The three main goals are to teach, learn, improve, and do that continuously. The program relies on bringing the best guest speakers in three series: architecture and engineering, which are of equal importance in building design, and masters to learn from the great architects and engineers of the past. Each of the NORR Ed sessions started in 2020 have been recorded with the guest speaker's permission and are available on NORR Ed YouTube for global access. Today's session will be posted in 1 week. Welcome all of the NORR 14 office staff and our invited guests globally. Participating schools, we welcome the invited students from the 13 schools of architecture in Canada and the USA and the United Kingdom. And welcome for the first time the students from George Brown School of Architecture Studies and Center of Arts, Design and Information Technology. We are glad to be able to contribute to the architectural student global community. And now I would like to ask our chair, founder, and host of NORR Ed, Silvia Baldessero, to introduce the guest speaker.
Thank you, Andrew. Our guest speaker today, in his TED Talks, shared that his inspiration stems from the emotional response that architecture can create. Siamak Hariri noted, and I quote, "The school that I studied at some 30 years ago happened to be across from a wonderful art gallery designed by Louis Kahn. I love that building and used to visit it quite often. One day I saw a security guard run his hand across the concrete wall, and it was the way he did it. The expression on his face, something touched me. I could see that the security guard was moved by the building and that architecture has the capacity to move you. I could see it and remembered thinking, wow, how does architecture do that? At the school I was learning to design, but here is a reaction of the heart, and it touched me to the core." 3 decades later, Siamak Hariri has continued to learn, as he says, to aspire for beauty, for sensuous, for atmosphere, for emotional response, for a chance to try. His architectural commitment are to bring to every project a profound interest in light, form, sight, material, and craft. Every project starts with the Tombow sketch pen translated into physical model studies, digital renderings, and then REVIT drawings. Siamak graduated from the University of Waterloo and then on to Yale University for his master's in architecture in 1985. After working at a number of firms in New York and Toronto, he founded Hariri Pontarini with David Pontarini in 1994. Today, that firm is one of the preeminent international firms of about 150 people and has won numerous awards for their designs. Siamak is a fellow of the REIC 2014, a doctorate of architecture from Ryerson University 2017. Siamak has received over 60 awards and 4 Governor General medals. He also has the REIC International Prize, which very few have. I now turn this session over to my good friend, Siamak Hariri to share his presentation entitled Falling Backwards. Please welcome Siamak Hariri.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, dear Silvio, and also thank you for including me in this series. I titled the talk that I'm about to give Falling Backwards, because I wanted to open really ourselves up as a practice, as a firm. As you mentioned, we're about 150 people, and definitely what I'm about to present reflects a deeply collaborative process, and you'll see that hopefully in the presentation. But I think that what really I wanted to do was say to you that, yes, when I saw that security guard run his hand, I asked the question, how does architecture create an emotional response? What is, like music, like painting, like sculpture, you know, you live for that response that people can have to architecture that somehow, you know, makes their heart skip a beat or makes their knees go weak. And what is that emotional response? And that is the question really that I've been asking, and we've been asking with the work. Of course, the work has to you know, address function. It has to address codes. It has to address budgets, really important. It has to address timelines. But that's not really what you live for. That's not the thing that really moves you. That's not the thing that takes you from one place to the other. What really you live for is exactly what you described. And so I really thought maybe right from the beginning, I'm just going to go to how we started with this tiny little project, which was a little fountain project. But look at this model, cast model that we made out of plaster, which then really kind of became this idea of building, making. And I think what really I love in this earliest project is these heavy, solid pieces of stone. I often wonder whether this project, this very first project, which was a fountain project, didn't embody the kind of DNA of a lot of things that effloresced from it. This, I don't know, what became of us to be daring enough to use these massive pieces of stone that literally are sections that come together in pieces like this, and this sense of lusciousness, delight, detail, craft, proportion, movement, all of these things that, and right down to, you know, even worrying about how copper plate would be bent. These are all preoccupations that started the kind of DNA and the soul of the practice. And eventually, of course, you move very quickly to small scale projects. Someone gives you a house edition. But again, this fascination with craft, with how things come together, an early project here, which really jumped in terms of use to a gallery project up in Barrie. We won a competition, really made a kind of a big leap possible for the McLaren Art Gallery. And again, creating this sense of how can we create something combining old and new that would have a sense of this coming in and feeling like it has this ability to grab you emotionally. And here you see this piece, which is old and new. I love this early project, and I'm jumping very quickly through this kind of chronology of pieces, but I love this very first project because the city of Toronto gave us a chance as an early practice in a competition for a women's shelter. And again, the very first pieces set, I think, a lot of the kind of the spirit for the projects that followed. This was a series of old houses on Sherbourne Street, and we created this courtyard behind this project that surrounded the old houses, but really was kind of hidden from the city. And how we came really to this again, this idea that architecture could remain very quiet, its presence could be laid back, it could let the old have a lot of the presence on the street, and yet within it, I love this idea that it kind of demonstrated this idea of care. We were very worried about each of the clients within the shelter getting their own tiny little room. And I love the fact that we made these cardboard models that showed how we could make each of the rooms work with this dormer window. And then that then became the kind of feel for the architecture, this kind of sprawling horizontal house. But I think if you look here, you see that the details of that very first little project are there. And the architecture really has this kind of sense of wanting to explore how can materials, craft, space create this sense of an emotional response that I was describing earlier on. So the projects start to get more complex. Somehow, these are early houses, and you can see this kind of thinness being explored, the sense of curves, the sense of the softness being explored here in section, and how that plays out. And this, the idea of gentle curves was very much trying to, again, figure out how we could create a contemporary language that could be more approachable while not losing that sense of craft and that sense of detail that we were after. And again, the early houses were constantly an exploration of the same theme. You can see here these hand drawings that you spoke of, Silvio, really taking a very slow approach to architecture. And these drawings that are they're exploring how we can cut into the kind of material fabric of the elevation. Here you can see here, and these models that then explore the same idea and how that then becomes the expression for the front of the building. I think this was really an interesting idea of opacity on one side, and then the gentle curve, and then these cuts into the volume that then bring light. All of this, again, exploring how can architecture have this response that I spoke of at the beginning of the talk. Landscape starts to have more and more an important role. And in areas where it needs to, the architecture starts to actually open up even more and more and explode out to the kind of the larger views. These projects now, as a language, as an approach, start to grow within the practice to one of the most pivotal projects in the practice, which was for the McKinsey headquarters on Charles Street, which was another one of those projects. It's a public-private proposition. It belongs to U of T, but was really commissioned and leased by McKinsey. And we tried very hard to working with them to create an initiative, which was, what would the workplace of the future look like? And you can start to see this architecture wrapping itself as an idea around the central space, which we dubbed the hive, which became a kind of a collective expression of community for this project. But again, all of this exploration of how do we create an architecture that has a kind of an expression of material solidity, this idea of the stone being cut, the different types of stone, getting right into the construction. You can see here, I'm sort of telling my age by this picture, but and the the building really became, I think, a kind of a continuation and an efflorescence of much of that earlier exploration. You can see the kind of lineage. And I think that even you can see, if you look closely on the left, the kind of language of the earliest project, which was the fountain project, extending itself here in some of this detail. So, and the hand drawings continue to figure quite prominently. They sort of, they continue to be kind of the soul of the approach and the search for what is it within the architecture that makes it possible to have that kind of response that I spoke of at the beginning of the talk. What is it? And so it's now starting to become a number of things. It's starting to become landscape. It's starting to become proportion, which is very mysterious. It's starting to become an extension of outside to inside. It's starting to become ideas of actually form, creating courts, the manipulation and extension of light. Craft is very important, and detail. And you'll see that in this project, we got a chance. You can tell the age of the project by the computer there, but we got a chance to do everything here, everything, the furniture, the landscape. And so that was an extraordinary opportunity. So this was the central space, which was dubbed the Hive, and it became the gathering space. And this project actually made us a little bit more confident, right down to the level of detail, so that we could take on larger projects at this point. This is the Schulich School of Business, which was an extension of that whole language, but also extension of scale, but still trying to retain that level of detail. And really this kind of this sense that it still maintains at the institutional level, hopefully, that same attention to proportion, light, detail, craft. Another beautiful project, which was for the University of Waterloo at this point, another competition entry for School of Pharmacy. And of course, with each of these projects, we have to demonstrate extremely defendable approaches to sustainability. And so in this case, the story of pharmacy and medicinal plants starts to become something that we worked with a wonderful artist by the name of Sky Glabush to paint onto the film, which was produced by 3M on the glass, these images of medicinal plants that then became the kind of story of what this building was, which then created a series of spandrel panels that then tell the story of pharmacy and what the building is for the city. But you can see that again, we're exploring this idea of how to create spaces that that have a sense of warmth, that are contemporary, but that extend out to the landscape, that are always trying to create a kind of an emotional response with the architecture. Similarly here, this is the law school for the University of Toronto, another competition, international competition that we entered. And this idea that a single system would create an armature for 5 different elevations all the way around, that then would allow us to articulate different levels of opacity at those 5 elevations and create a very defendable, sustainable approach, very, very small percentage of glass. And so these became the entry pictures, and then the final result working. Bregman and Hammond took this through as the executive architects. But here you see the final result. And I think something that I wanted to speak to with many of the younger people here is this constant desire to explore at the smaller scale always the things that that I was speaking about. So this idea that we always continue to do the houses. This is a wonderful project for the inventor of the BlackBerry on Lake Huron, which became a competition winning scheme, which resulted in the exploration of very large glass. At the end, the entire project was, from an energy point of view, sustained by a single windmill, and allowed us. This was a wonderful project because it allowed us to explore technology and materials and suppliers and fabricators from a much wider range, and push the firm into new directions. So you can see here the something that was very new was the exploration of ceilings, of details, that then started to push us in new directions using materials like the bronze windows and the stone throughout. Again, a kind of love for the same things that we started with. This idea that everything revolves around this idea of craft, detail, proportion, trying to somehow find even this stone and how it's materially softened continues in every project as an exploration. Another one of the small houses, the smaller projects being a house, these early sketches again, you know, where do they come from? And they become the kind of generating impulse for the feeling of the architecture. And then that extends to detail, proportion, extension outside, gardens. All of this, you can see the feeling and the spirit of the original piece, which was that fountain piece, coming through even here. Constantly exploring. These are all working with stone fabricators to design our own pieces, but these are all elements that continue to be part of the language. This is with cast bronze, an extension of the exploration of bronze, but all of this constant exploration of texture, of materiality, of craft, of detail. Even this handle we designed and cast ourselves. These are strike plates for the doors that we designed using these wonderful strips of blackened oak set into the bronze. And again, earliest explorations always started with these sketches. This is a house in Mono, which was exploring very much now this idea of softness, of extending the form, dematerializing it into the landscape. How do we break down? How do we extend? How do we actually welcome? And how do we kind of make it feel as if it's an extension of the kind of topography of the landscape? And then pushing this idea of craft. Here, these are hand-carved elements that constitute the kind of weave of the ceiling and how that works in the landscape. And the bigger projects then take all of this. This is for the Ivy Business School. Again, another international competition that we were very lucky to be selected for. This is the idea of a geode, which formed the kind of nucleus of the story for the project, which was this idea of bringing the whole school around the center, which would have this kind of sparkle and bring together the kind of life of the school. And you can see this is the elements here. The earliest sketches, again, hand sketches, which then made, I think you'll see that this is really an extension of the language of the houses and the explorations into the institutional scale, and how that works Again, still the hand drawings and how they become the elements. This is a view down the courtyard, and this love for the materiality, the craft, the softness, the warmth, right down to the level of the furniture coming through. So it's all one thing. You can feel, even from the earliest project, which was the women's shelter here, you can see that the extension of the cloister comes through, and these studies, which are very important to us in model. This is of one of the classrooms, which became one of the units throughout, and how that then extends into a language, both for the screens, for the faculty. I'm running through this quickly because I want to take you to the point where I think I want to land with two projects. This is the Carleton Business School and another business school, which we very much love this idea of a small business school having to have this sense of presence within the overall campus and having enough of an interior, this kind of wrapping element that you walk into and create this sense of community right away. So here's an early sketch, and then that became the kind of generative element for the whole school. Healthcare, another one of the very important aspects of when you have these houses which demonstrate so much care and attention. How do we take that and bring that forward into healthcare? Well, this wonderful project, which was a project involving old and new for Casey House, a new type of AIDS hospital. And we did these early sketches, which was around a sliver courtyard, a tiny little courtyard that you see in Europe, and how that created a sense of interiority and a sense of courtyard. And that then, along with this idea of a quilt, which, as you know, figures very prominently in the AIDS culture, and how that then became part of the facade and the look, and then that became the architecture. And this old and new embrace each other, bringing light into the middle of the project, and this sense of warmth and materiality, bringing that into the healthcare environment was something that was very much top of mind. So here's that project. Same thing with an MS clinic that we worked on, and you can see here, these early model studies then became the kind of architecture here. And again, that same level of attention to craft, materiality, texture, carving the space from the inside out that we showed for the houses, trying to bring that level of attention for something as important as this project, which is a clinic for this horrible disease, MS. Princess Margaret, and again, making the entry experience, the lobby experience for this cancer hospital very much like again, like one of the homes, so you create this sense of warmth, intimacy, generosity, bringing that to the hospital environment, right down to designing our own lamps and chairs. And really, this was one of the toughest projects working with NORR that we had to undertake, because it involved surgical work within a live hospital. So this is where I wanted to land, was all of that really falling backwards is really about ending up, as you go through the exploration and process of the design, that you come to a point where really you would not have imagined. So this was another international competition. We entered for the Tom Patterson Theatre in Stratford, and really, if you imagine the entire trajectory of the work that I showed you, really all of that comes to bear here in this story of how to create an international theater that has presence, that has this ability to attract, that really respects this extraordinary site along the river and honors the institutional memory that the Tom Patterson Theatre had within the existing curling rink that it existed in. So here's this wonderful river, and we came up with this concept of something that would have this ribbon-like quality, this attractor, how to skip over this road. We lifted the entire project 7 feet and created these early sketches of here, let me go back to that. These models that would lift the project up that 7 feet, and then talked about how wonderful really the river edge is. This idea of an eddy started to become part of the story. Eddies as places where things collect. And I love this Joseph Boy's flower, this dried flower, and how he has it across the swath of blue like the river, and how it created this kind of ragged edge similar to river plants and how they stretch and reach in one direction. And so these are the early sketches again, hand drawing, feeling our way through what that might look like, this idea of a line set against gardens, set against the line of the river, and that became the concept. And that then became the kind of figure along the Avon River, which stretches east, it stretches south, it stretches north, and really has its back hard against the south edge, and then becomes this veil, this curtain of bronze that becomes the kind of figural presence of the theater, with the centerpiece, the grounding piece being the theater itself. And you can see that here in these early model studies, and how that then like set against gardens as a very important kind of foreground. So each of the spaces goes from space to garden to river, and that then becomes the kind of idea. We work very closely with wonderful garden designer, landscape architect Ron Holbrook, and thinking about how to create a kind of a garden that would change with all of the various seasons. And here you can see the earliest image of what that concept was and what it ended up being. So much of this was working so closely with the Stratford people and the team, and we had our own extraordinary team together with Ellis Don, who built this. But I think that what was amazing was just the kind of the ability of us to stay on track with the original concept, which was this kind of bronze veil that then wraps the kind of, you can see the central drum, which is the theater itself. And then that then created these kind of eddy experiences, this idea that from the inside you come out and you get this wonderful space where conversations can be held. There's a forum space that then becomes programmed with all sorts of activities, and constantly from everywhere you get the view of the river. And here you see some of the various spaces. This is the forum space, which is programmed, and the detail. And I hope that we can have a conversation around this, that the scale of this, the attention to the detail, the attention to the craft is not that dissimilar from the explorations that we had very early on in the kind of formation of the practice. And you can see here, there's a much more sophisticated version of that same ceiling now being applied to an institutional use with obviously a very tight budget and schedule. Early studies of the theater working very closely with the artistic director, which was a dream, and the Stratford team itself to come up with something that served their functional needs, but also retained this this wonderful, much loved space that that the original Tom Patterson had, which was this wood curling rink. So we kind of kept that same section and created this this warm basket, this perfect shape, this kind of classical shape, this arena shape, all around the long, deep thrust stage that was the original Tom Patterson Theatre. And then that, of course, became the heart and soul of the design. And so here it is in different seasons, and the bronze veil and the bronze canopy figuring quite prominently here. So, and then the last project which I wanted to show was the Baha'i temple in Santiago de Chile. Again, another competition that was from, we submitted, I think it was 185 submissions from 80 countries, and how to begin something, which is really, this was maybe one of the most challenging projects, how to begin something that was entirely about an emotional reaction. It's a single space. I remember Arthur Erickson saying temples are the most difficult after houses. This idea that you create a single space that has nothing really other than it's about creating an emotional response to within the architecture. The program is extremely simple. It is 9-sided, no pulpit, which makes it really interesting as a project because it has to be a house of worship, but in that sense, it's a new typology. It's a new form because it's the first one without really that I know of without a pulpit. And so the idea for the building really draws on this wonderful quote from the writings of Baha'u'llah, which are really the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, which speaks to prayer. And this idea that if your prayer is answered, your very being becomes pillars of light. This idea of embodied light started to capture our imagination, and how to create this sense of light, like alabaster when it is kissed by light becomes embodied with light. And this truly speaks to this notion of letting the process take you somewhere where you really don't know where you're going to end up. And so this is a whole series of exploratory models that were made not knowing how and where we were going to end up. And I like this idea very much. I like this idea of allowing the process to take you to a place where you're totally surprised. And that's why I thought this idea of falling backwards, like the experiment in psychology, where it's a test of trust to let yourself fall backwards and be caught by the process. In this case, the idea that something that would have embodied light, which came early, this idea of two skins began to emerge, but what shape it took was very, very, very complicated. You can see in the early explorations, these things looked like eggs. But then at one point, we saw this video produced by a 5-year-old, I think, where it shows in time motion plants reaching for light, and very much spoke to me about this idea that maybe we need to incorporate movement and stillness into the form. And so these early sketches started to talk about movement around a circle, very much a universal kind of archetype. And that then, with these extraordinary model studies that were made, started to take us to places where we didn't know where we would end up. We were using Maya as well to try and capture some of the complex geometries that were starting to form. And I love this idea that geometry plays very strongly in the kind of formation of the order of this temple project, but at the same time, it doesn't kind of become a heavy-handed geometry. So the project, like the Pantheon, has in section and in plan a perfect 30-meter circle, but the order is not unlike found in nature. The tessellation found in each of the wings is quite diverse. And I love that, because one of the principles of the Baha'i faith was unity in diversity, and that each of the pieces somehow have a unique shape, and that together they form this kind of strong order. So this is the earliest sketch. This is the final order. This idea that all 9 wings bind themselves together around this eye to the heavens, this very strong ordering principle that basically 3 rings structurally hold the entire temple together: the oculus, the middle ring, and the foundation. And otherwise, it is, each of the wings is free forming. What that really symbolically means is which I loved, was this idea that really the purpose of bringing people together is this idea of binding. And so the architecture reflects the whole purpose of the project, which is this idea of bringing unity within let's say within humanity. So the outside, we had to find a new material, and we were working with Jeff Goodman, which was another one of the things that I wanted to touch on, which was every one of these projects involves a deep collaboration with great fabricators, artists, and this really has propelled the practice to where we are now. We have these deep relationships among the many, many amazing, talented people within the firm, and they all have these relationships with fabricators and suppliers. In this case, we worked 1.5 years with Jeff Goodman to come up with a new form of glass, which then became this extraordinary material that we used on the outside, which lets the light through, but obscures the structure from the outside. On the inside, we were using this translucent marble from Estremoz, which took us also almost 1 year to find, and came about really by accident through the project that I showed you off of Lake Huron. This supplier had held this this vein in this quarry of this beautiful white translucent stone of exceptional quality for 7 generations in his family, and we were very lucky to find it, but even more lucky that he was willing to sell it to us at very tight budget that we had for this project. Anyway, here's this beautiful stone, and here's the translucent stone going up first, and you can see the movement of the light in the temple, and how that would create this sense of sensing the movement of the sun during the day. This idea that a prayer answered becomes embodied light within the kind of architecture. The light in the early morning, this beautiful dawn blue light, midday, has this kind of tent-like soft white light, and then in the afternoon, of course, the glow of this orange light, this gold light, and how that finding the site was 9-year journey on this project. So this project took 13 years in total, but what an extraordinary site at the end. The finding the site and the whole journey of the site could be the making of an entire talk. But I think that now it has become, actually, I think it's become an international attractor. It's received some 2 million visitors before COVID. The gardens, again, you remember I spoke about how important the relationship of the architecture to the landscape, working with this extraordinary landscape architect by the name of Juan Green, and how the pattern of the temple just kind of stretches out and becomes the pattern for the gardens. And here's a kind of a close-up shot of this idea that the temple, at its really kind of at its philosophical beginnings, is about becoming a place that is open to all, whether you're of one faith or another faith or no faith at all. The idea of the architecture was that it should be something that is welcoming to everyone. And so this idea that it was transparent and open along the base was fundamental to the kind of making of the architecture. And so the space within, no pulpit, just a space that has really no lectures, no sermons. It is a space where only prayer and readings from all of the world's great religions, including the Baha'i faith, are read. And it's become really a place that belongs now to the people of Santiago, which was really the whole point of it, that it become their place. Okay, maybe I'll do this. Okay, that was what I had, Silvio, for this discussion, hoping that we have a chance to discuss the idea of some process really taking you in terms of the making of a firm, but also the making of the work to a place where you really couldn't have anticipated. That was where we were at.
Siamak, thank you. Emotional response that architecture can create, that's where you started. It's thank you for taking us through your work. Thank you for taking us through those projects from the start and where you are right now. And you know, your path has just started. I mean, it's quite an incredible amount of work. I'm going to ask a couple of people to come on one at a time, and the first one that I'm going to ask to come on is Elsa Lamb, the editor of the Canadian Architect, to ask a few questions. Elsa, welcome.
Thanks so much, Silvio, and thanks so much for this presentation, Siamak. It's such a treat to see work that I'm familiar with, as well as work that I haven't seen before, and certainly those links between that kind of trace throughout the trajectory of your work are really palpable. They're really very much there. I was looking at that house in Mono that you showed, and thinking about how, you know, how some of those proportions in the canopy really very much echo the Tom Patterson Theatre, which I have gotten to see and was fortunate to tour with you. I guess, what was that? Was it 3 months ago now? 4 months ago? It's like it's time warp with COVID.
Yeah.
I-
Yeah, I think it was maybe too fast to try to show so much, but I think what I really wanted to do in this presentation was talk about how really it's all one thing, and I hope that came across. You know, it's basically one exploration, even though you're going from project to project, that there's a kind of a spirit in the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to zoom in a little bit on Tom Patterson Theatre. And in a way, there's, you know, those last two projects, there's something that I see in common with Tom Patterson Theatre and the Baha'i Temple. I mean, many things in common, but one thing that's kind of striking when you talk about the Baha'i Temple as a place, you know, as a kind of a place, you know, a spiritual place that doesn't have an altar, that doesn't have a pulpit or lectures or sermons or anything. And in a way, you know, although the Tom Patterson Theatre, you know, does have performances, obviously, the nature of that stage is so particular in that it's a thrust stage, which I guess for those listening who are not familiar with that is kind of the stage that is a very long stage that really comes right out into the audience. And my understanding from, you know, speaking with you and seeing that space and speaking to the artistic director of the Stratford Festival is that that configuration is very much about, in a way, you know, decentering the performance in a way, or, you know, putting the audience in touch with each other as much as with the performance itself. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that notion.
Well, I think you pretty much explained it. I think that Elsa, first of all, the shape is unique, and it's unique to the Tom Patterson, and so it became the soul of the project right from day one. That was going to be ground zero. I think that what makes it unique also is, and Anthony, the Cimolino, the artistic director, told me that it's the emotional reaction from audience to audience that really creates theater. And I love that, this idea that you kind of you create this sense of intimacy within the kind of configuration of the audience around that theater. As you say, it's deep, it's long, and then you get this kind of wonderful horseshoe. And so we worked very hard with him so that people could literally see the eyeballs of people across the stage. And it's that, and he kept saying, it's the little girl that tears up that's in front of you, way at the other end of the theater, that creates that emotional experience. And that's what makes theater is different than going to see a movie. It's different than, let's say, Netflix. And so we worked very hard. But then the opposite experience is also very important, is that you have you have a chance to kind of gather after the or during the intermission, and you make something as special of that. And that's why the veil and this extension to landscape and garden and forum and education and eddies. And so you have this possibility to say, oh, Elsa, what did you think of that? Didn't that, oh my God, wasn't that, like, and then you start to have this conversation around what the piece did for you, this, or you bump into people, or you go to an event before, or you have a bite to eat, or you make a day of it. And so the whole theater experience becomes more than just going to see the show, which is already an amazing thing. But now people want to make a day of it. They want to make something special of it. So this theater going has changed, and we had to respond to that. So yeah, it is the stage, but the stage is the eddies, the stage is the forum, the stage is the education, the stage is the children, the stage is the fact that you bump into old friends, that you make new ones. All of that was part of the making of this kind of new idea of a theater. And I think it is a new idea. I think that this is something unique. We haven't seen it in the world. And really it's the result of Anthony and Anita and the Stratford people really putting this before us as a kind of a challenge, how to create a new experience for theater. And you're absolutely right that the long thrust, the deep thrust stage was the beginning of it. The whole thing's a stage.
It's about, yeah, and stages for people who are traditionally the audience members, versus the stages for actors and actresses. I mean, I'm curious when you talk about that interaction, whether, it's all about communication, right? And I'm kind of curious whether the actors are also affected by, by performing in that kind of place, and whether they're affected by the reaction of the audience members.
So far, it's been wonderful. I tell you honestly, I've received, but let's see, right? I mean, when we first started the project, they said to us, their original theater, the Festival Theater, took them for the first 50 years. We got a letter from Rick Haldenby. He was the organizer for the whole competition, said the first theater propelled the institution for 50 years. And that they want this next project to take this institution for the next 50. I mean, that's pretty cool. That architecture is actually seen as something that can actually participate really in let's say in the journey of one of the great institutions in Canada, and culture, right? Culture, it's so important. It's where we really have a chance to voice the soul of the country, really. I mean, and it's so important to us to have the things that matter to us somehow happen within this place. So the fact that they actually thought that architecture was important, pretty cool. And the fact that they sort of put out this big call to architecture to come up with something special, again, very cool. And frankly, I mean, yeah, Canadian architect getting finally selected, even from our point of view, I'm glad that we were able to hold our ground, because it was a tough contest.
Yeah, well, very, very cool project, very moving project, I would say. Yeah.
But I think from the presentation, and I had to go quickly, so how does architecture move you? That's really how does it do that? And really we're asking the same questions as how does music do that? Like this idea that you have this strange dance between the material and the immaterial, and how to really genuinely, sincerely explore that in the work. What is it that something that is not material can be affected by the material? Do you follow what I'm saying? Like this
Absolutely.
Very interesting question. And that's why I was in love with this idea of the security guard and his reaction. Like, how does it happen actually? And frankly, how do we demonstrate care in our work? How do we demonstrate? Like, those are really interesting words in the kind of making of the work.
I want to explore that question with you a bit more, this question of care. And the other word that you used a lot in your presentation was about attention. What is that reaction between, how is it that, that kind of personal sense of care and attention gets translated? What, is there, and is that something that how do you cultivate that in yourself as a kind of, maybe that's a bit of a more personal question, but, how do you cultivate those qualities in a way that, allows them to be translated into architecture, or does it matter to cultivate those qualities?
I think it really deeply matters. I think that it touches on the whole point of being here, is that somehow we're given this possibility to reflect, if you like, attributes that somehow mysteriously are able to find expression when we do put forth effort, care, all of these things that you're talking about, like, and so it's a really interesting thing, because it's so painful at times, it's so difficult at times, and yet when you touch on it, it gives you enormous satisfaction to have it, right? And so, like, how does that, and really, it's such an important part, I think, of why we would want to be alive. And so I think from my point of view, it matters a lot. And somehow, if you're able to touch on it, it literally I don't know, it is an important part of getting at really who we are. And we could have a long conversation about that, but I don't want to get into it right now. But I mean, it is an important part of, like, for some reason, certain things do that, and beauty is important. And I thought that, for example, both in the temple and for the Tom Patterson, both clients spoke about the importance of beauty, which I think is very interesting, because it's a word that's not often used. And yet, alongside truth and justice, beauty really are at the highest reaches of our possibility. And so, in that sense, I think that they are so important today, and they do require what you said, which is this enormous care. It's very fragile. Beauty is very fragile, very fragile, very and requires enormous care and attention.
I think I'll leave my contribution there, but and just with a big thank you, Siamak, for sharing, for creating this beautiful work, and for sharing it with us today.
Thank you, Elsa. Thank you.
Elsa, you can stay on for a few minutes, because I think you could probably contribute to this as well. But I wanted to ask Siamak, you brought up something which is really interesting, that Arthur Erickson said, and I think that this is true of definitely of you and your firm, and the way that you do architecture. And it's missing in a lot of architectural firms. And I wanted to talk about it because there are a lot of students that are on the line, and I think that it's part of the it's part of architecture, which I certainly feel strongly about, and I think that you do too. And that is house design, and I think that it's something that is incredibly difficult, and it's incredibly important. And I think that those architectural firms and those architects that don't do it lose a lot from it. I'm interested in hearing your impressions of it, because I think it's that one area where you talk about material and craft and detail, and it's that one area that often gets lost in the large scale projects where you don't do the furniture, you don't do the millwork, and you don't do all of those other things. But in a house, you can't get away from it. It's the one thing that's incredibly important. I'm just interested in your thoughts about that and the importance of designing houses.
Well, I think you said it all, Silvio. I think that you know, when you work very closely with a client, like you do in a house, and they're pushing you, you're pushing them, and all of that is to try and take you to somewhere where, as I said, you could become a little surprised, and you keep pushing on this idea of how to kind of lift the spirit, you know, lift somehow create that kind of sense of I don't know, a feeling within the architecture of atmosphere. It really, within a home, this is one of the things that you can do and you can explore very, very much with someone, how they can take delight in where they live, how they can really take advantage of an amazing setting, how you can really hold your own feet to the fire when it comes to attention to detail and craft, all of these things. And then it helps propel your thinking, it helps propel the practice. It certainly helps us when we explore with fabricators and craftsmen. It helps push our thinking within the practice a lot. And frankly, I like it. I like the relationships. I really enjoy the relationships with the clients. It's much deeper, it's much more personal, and it oscillates nicely with institutions. Now, I'll give you an example. At Stratford, and Elsa will remember, a big part of the project was texture, the softness of the light within the space. And a big part of that was figuring out the brick and how to actually create the right brick, how to create the right space between the bricks, how the mortar color, and how that was struck flush and how it created this wonderful surface. Well, you can't do that stuff quickly when you're doing it for an institution, because, sorry, you can't do that stuff. You can't take 6 months to come up with that idea when you're doing it for an institution like Stratford. But we took a long time to come up with that for a wonderful house that we did in Rosedale, where the client wanted brick. And they wanted brick within the inside of their house. And we said, well, we never did brick. And they said, well, get on this thing. And so we were exploring brick for a long time, which brick to use, what texture, and how to create that sense of the detail around the brick and the joints, and all of that was done in the small scale. And then when we needed it, we grabbed it for the theater. So I think the two work very closely, hand in hand. And the clients push you. Usually the clients we get, they don't want you to do what you did before for someone else. And so they constantly are pushing you, and they come up with amazing projects with amazing sites. So I think it helps generate joy, wonder, excitement, all of the things that you want to practice to revolve around.
Thank you. Elsa, any comments on house design?
You guys have said it all.
Thank you for being on, Elsa. Really appreciate it. I'm going to ask Frank Panici, who is Vice President of NORR, Architects and Engineers, who has worked with Siamak. And Frank, please go ahead.
Yeah, Siamak, yeah, wow, great presentation. And the architecture is so awe-inspiring, and your buildings are great. The temple is fantastic. We have sort of an ongoing collaborative sort of relationship, and we've done several projects with your firm and your wonderful team there as well. With the Princess Margaret Cancer Center, when we worked there, we were asked to come up with a design that's transformational, one that sort of shifts the paradigm of how care is delivered within the facility. And it was sort of a really great experience for working with yourselves on that. How do you how does that design, and how does that project really transform that patient care experience in your mind?
Well, first of all, Frank, it was a dream working with you. Really, I'm not just saying that because this is a NORR Ed talk, but because I really think that that was one of the toughest projects. It may actually vie as the toughest project we've ever undertaken in the practice, and that includes the temple, because we had, first of all, you had this gobbledygook of a hospital. Like, it had, how many hospitals were layered on top of each other? It was like 5 or 6 hospital designs all in one. An old one, and then another one, and then another one, and then one with an atrium and one without an atrium. And so there were things that just went on that we just collectively, you and I, looked at it, and we just scratched our head and said, why in the world would someone do this to people with, immune challenged situations, with very weak bodies, and you have them kind of climbing a ski hill to get in the front door, and the interior experience, I remember, was just, it was mind-boggling. Like, you literally would walk into what the director of the hospital called a rat's maze. I mean, you really didn't know where the heck. And this was one of the 5 top hospitals in the world. And I remember you and I sitting back and just kind of, I think it was a tough nut to crack, because we had to create a feeling. And we said to ourselves, you remember, with Mary Gospodarovitz, who was the head of the hospital, and various other key players at the hospital, of course, this idea that you would step into a place and you would feel like they got your back. Like, this place has got me and they care about me. And we said that has to happen right from the sidewalk, like very far from either side. So this story of green to green started to evolve, which was very important in the making of the hospital design. And I think that what we ended up doing was, like, I called it 1,000 moments of care. We ended up thinking through the patient, as you said, the patient experience. And it's something that was way beyond what a normal hospital will allow you to do. And together with you and your team, we had to really challenge so many of the kind of conventions that were part of the experience, like using wood, like using stone, like using real materials, like literally redoing the entire front so that it became a softer experience. Providing for tiny little things which are so important, like giving places for people to wait while someone else is parking the car. I mean, it's just basic stuff that demonstrates consideration, care. And now I've heard back from many people that they feel like that level of care that we tried to put in. Obviously we couldn't do it together, you and I. I look forward to the chance that you and I would have to design our own hospital, rather than having to go into one that had 50 layers of existing conditions. But boy, oh boy, that was not an easy experience, and thank you for being such a good partner on that project, because my goodness, you took the lion's share of that to get it through construction. And that was not easy. There were 3,000 people immune challenged that had to go through those doors every day and get to where they needed to go, while we completely rebuilt the whole lobby of that hospital. Very difficult.
It's a very difficult project, but worthwhile at the end. And I've heard, again, a lot of positive feedback from the patients there. And that's what it's all about. It's all about, the patients and making sure that we get that right. So that was a great great experience with your team and yourself. The other question that I've got is the exploratory sketches, the hand drawings, the concept drawings, the initial idea or the seed of a project. And those are the seeds that I think flourish with with these projects. And you've said, you know, where does it come from? Like, Siamak, can you explain where does those sketches come from? Where do those ideas come from? How does that seed germinate and create a building for you?
Boy, oh boy. I think that is the question. And I think that that is a much bigger conversation, but I think that if we're honest, we would say we don't know. And I like that answer, and I like the humility of that answer, hopefully, and the curiosity that humility might create. What you're asking, Frank, is one of the most important questions in my mind, which is this idea that and that's what I meant by falling backwards, that you accept the fact that really, in the end, what gives us joy and pleasure in this process is putting our best effort towards as perfect as we can possibly make it, but acknowledging that it's not from us at the same time. And it's that combination which I find most fascinating, because you really can't claim it. You don't know where your thoughts come from, and you don't know where the impulse of that drawing comes from. You do have to work hard. It does take practice. And every time you throw yourself at it harder and harder and harder, it becomes more and more interesting. And you get these dollops where you touch on things that make it more interesting. But to say, oh, it's from me, it's like ridiculous. That's ridiculous. I don't know where my next breath comes from. I don't know, you know? And so it's a very interesting combination of, I don't know, but darn it, it better be as perfect as it can possibly be. And in that sense, the work becomes a form of, I don't know, what do you call it? Worship?
Yeah,
No?
I would say.
It's like something where you say, here, I'm doing my best. Am I doing okay? And you do your best to work with so many great minds as we have within the practice, so many different minds within the practice that then take you in directions that you didn't know. And then you start working with clients and they take you in different directions. And then you work with the fabricators and the suppliers and they take you in there. And so suddenly the whole thing becomes this incredible cocktail of falling backwards. You don't know. And it becomes a much more complex painting than if I were just painting by myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what's interesting is that you let the accidents happen, you let the surprises happen, but at the same time, you can't own it. No way, no way. Doesn't make any sense. And I think this idea that, oh, you have this wonderful authorship, I would really question it. I think the future will really question this. I think that actually we're moving towards a very different paradigm, which is one where you say, really, it's way deeper than that, way more mysterious than that. And it's not about the singular person. It's not about this kind of thing where, you know, you have this auteur, but it's much more exciting than that. It's much more interesting than that. It's more where the whole thing becomes this collective process of, as I say, falling backwards into a process, which then takes you to a place that you could never have imagined. That's why I wanted to show the trajectory of the work, because the trajectory of the work has something that holds it together. It does change and moves around, but the trajectory is always asking some similar questions.
Well, we're very excited, and again, thank you for the presentation, Siamak. We look forward to finding out what that paradigm or that new paradigm will be with your firm and yourself. And
I don't know if I hope I didn't present that. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we're the new paradigm. I'm just simply saying, I think the world is moving towards something that is little by little, something that really is the glimmerings, let's say, the glimmerings of something that is way more exciting than a bunch of individuals.
Yeah. That's great. Well, thank you very much, and look forward to finding that one or two more projects with your firm. And thank you again for the presentation. Fantastic.
Thank you for including me.
Thank you, Frank. Just a thought on that. You know, what you've done with the industry in particular, and what you brought up, Siamak, with working with the industry is a huge part, I think, of your work. And I think it needs to be that way, because the craft and the materials and I mean, it's you need to bring in those specialists to not only learn from those specialists, but to, as you said earlier, you know, where you're designing houses, the owners push you, you push the industry, and the industry pushes you back to, you know, to make it better, to find those new materials, to find those new processes, you know, to do what you're actually doing, and it's quite incredible. I think the Europeans do it incredibly well. I mean, the amount of research that they do in materials and the research that they do in projects, I think, you know, certainly in North America, architects don't do it as much. But certainly your firm is unique in doing that. I mean, I love your model shop. I mean, you know, that image that you showed of the temple, and you know, those are the images where, you know, the creativity really shows, where you've got it full of, you know, ideas in the physical models, as opposed to, you know, trying to do it through a machine, which is a lot more difficult. I mean, to see the creative process.
Thank you. I think that, Silvio, thank you so much for what you're doing here, which is allowing some of the practitioners, our fellow practitioners, but more importantly, some of the schools. I was hoping today, and I had to go a little bit too fast, maybe too much, but the idea that the young people can see something which is not a one-off project, but that the projects actually help feed each other, one after the other, and maybe after 30 years you get enough confidence to try something a little bit more daring. And I think that was the hope that I was trying to convey to the young people.
I think there was a great article in, I think it was the Globe, that your partner David Poncherini did on your models. I don't know if it was a year ago or 2 years ago, but it was a fantastic model, you know, article that was in the paper that really explored the models in your office, and great for you guys to actually be doing that. I'm going to ask Andrew Schmidt to come on, because the audience has questions that they've been sending in, and Andrew is going to pick and choose those questions to ask you, Siamak. So I'll turn that over to Andrew.
Thank you, Siamak. Fantastic presentation, and it was a pleasure to see some of your earlier works, and as you said, the trajectory, to get an understanding of the process, and where kind of maybe the roots of where you started and how it's evolved over the years. Personally, I fell in love with the Mackenzie building so many years ago, I think before I even knew your name or the firm. And I saw that building, and it was so wonderful to me. It's always been an inspiration, and it was a great presentation. Thank you. I've got a few questions in here. The first question is talking about sketching and hand modeling, which are obviously a big part of your process, and how you're creating an emotional response. I think a lot of your presentation actually speaks to this question, but the question specifically is what in your design process, how are you able to maintain an emphasis on emotion, especially when we're relying more and more on computers? And I think you demonstrated in the presentation today this balance, or from the models and the sketching, but ultimately, a lot of this stuff goes through the computers. The designers, the younger staff that are working, they're heavily in this 3D world. So I think you showed in the Baha'i temple, Maya was some of the software that you could. Maybe you could talk about how some of your designers and your team isn't disengaged, staring at screens and that, doing that text, or how the computer plays so you're not disconnected from that emotion.
Well, I think two things. One is we still draw by hand quite a bit, and I think the models also slow us down. I think, Silvio, you touched on the models. We do have a huge model shop, and I don't even actually call them models. They're more like artifacts. And many times I will do a few sketches, or others will do some sketches, and the people working in the model shop will interpret those, and then it will come back in a different way, and then that will propel the project in a whole different way. And so the idea really, and I keep talking about this, is and I spoke about this a lot with students when I was doing a little bit of teaching at U of T, was allowing one piece to take you from one place to the next. In other words, you escape the tyranny of image. Does that make sense? That if you start with image, you're dead, because you're at the end before you started. And so I'm not talking about tools, I'm talking about process. And so for me, hand drawing allows the process to be a little bit more open-ended. And so you get one thing that leads to another thing, that leads to another thing, that leads to another thing. And then you end up in a place that you get excited about more and more and more. And so it's very much a studio kind of a thing. It's very much a collaborative thing. I think people have a lot of influence. I try really hard to create an atmosphere, and I think others do in the office, where people's voices are really listened to, and we have a very engaging group. I mean, these are not slouches. These are serious people that have a lot of amazing input, and so the process takes you from here to there, and as Silvio said, it extends way beyond just us. And so I think the models, all of that allows the process to engage more and more with the possibility for allowing one thing to go to another place. I think for me, the hand drawings were very important because they slowed me down. That's all. You know, when you're drawing by hand, it sort of forces you to look and see and push. Whereas it's so easy to manipulate some other things that I think it was helpful for me to be able to just sit. And I often, especially with the projects like the houses, I will hand draw the whole thing many times at the end for the elevations and things like that, just because I like it. I actually enjoy it, but also it allows my eye to be all over the proportions and things like that. And I enjoy it. Like sometimes a small adjustment on some of these things to me has some meaningful effect, but it's really as I say, it's really part of a larger process these days. So many people have a hand in it.
Thank you. A follow-up question on that, and I think related to, is the details and the early details. How do you not distract from the overall partie? Do the finer details fall into place for you during that process, during the design process, or the decisions done early on, which will help and guide you and give you a picture of the target of the detailed decisions later? So I think the reference the person was asking for was the doorknob of copper bending on the there's one slide you have cast. You said you studio cast the copper.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think it's all one thing, and I know that sounds a bit trite, but I'm very slow, and so are others, to shift off of details that we're comfortable with. I know that sounds a little bit unadventurous of us, but I think if you looked at the temple, even with its complexity, the details are not that different from many of our projects. And because we get used to a certain way in which things come together and resolve themselves with each other, even when they're complex in form. But man, does it take a lot to get to the point where you're comfortable with a few things and how they come together. And even I would say, and this is one of my clients the other day said, you know, you always use more or less the same materials. And I tell you something, it's not easy to jump around with materials either. It's not easy to just find another material that does the same thing, that creates that same sense of combination, softness, and how you work with a material. It's taken many, many years to become comfortable with a few materials. And it took a long time to embrace this cast glass. Let me tell you, it wasn't like, oh, it's just a new material, let's go for it. And I find that, and I told this client, I said, you know, I find the architects that I like, they don't jump around with materials too much. It's not like, oh, let's try this one, let's try that one. No, you look at the really good ones, they don't use that many materials their whole life. It's hard to learn how to work with a few of these materials. And so when I mentioned that house on Lake Huron shifting us to bronze, huge step, I'm telling you, was a big step to learn how to actually work with bronze and work with the fabricators. We started working with Europeans and how to actually, you'd be shocked how many different grades of bronze and grain and texture and all of that. It's just like a whole world that we had to explore to become comfortable with it. So yeah, that's, I think the short answer.
I think that's a great answer. It talks to the trajectory and the evolution of the body of work too. So I think that from technical perfection to you know, the aesthetics and touching and feeling it and working with it over the years. So I'm sure there's a great evolution that occurs to some of those refinements in the details. So thank you. Next question is, how does that design process work in a competition? After the question.
I mean, first of all, they're all different. And what you really, in a competition, I'm just thinking through the various competitions. First of all, they're a bit crazy, right? You don't even really want to enter them because it's like one of those crazy things where why the heck do we put ourselves through this? You know, you for very little you're putting a ton of energy into something and you're putting yourself out there. And I've given a lot of thought to this, and I think that perhaps sacrifice is the fuel for making good work, and competitions really demand a level of, like, you got to put yourself out there and you got to be willing to take a big risk, and you've got to be willing to really bet the farm on it, you know. Like I'll never forget how my partner David Ponterini supported me and our team during the competition for the Baha'i Temple. I mean, that was like, you know, that it's not an easy thing. Like a partner at a moment like that can just say, well, you know, I'd rather we didn't, you know, and that's the end of it. So you think about something like that, and you think about that support, and that allowed us to take a run at that, you know, and so I think it does involve a huge amount of risk and sacrifice, these competitions, if that's what the question is. But I don't really understand, other than, you know, once you're in, you throw yourself in. And I showed that table with those models. They looked awful about halfway through that competition. And you just kind of, you're hoping to God something will hit you over the head that's exciting and that you feel good about and taking forward. Same thing with the Stratford one. I mean, I remember about halfway through, we had presentations to the Stratford people, and halfway through, we were starting to get excited. The idea somewhat came early, but to get it to the point where we got it was right until the bitter end kind of a thing. So, you know, it's part of the process. But I think risk taking is a big part of it. But I'd rather not. I'd rather someone say, here, let's work together and come up with an idea. Wouldn't you?
I do, yes. We're tricky hard things. I see a lot of sort of statements in here, but not a whole lot of questions. So it's a reminder to people if there's some more questions in the put it in the chat. But,
Wonderful.
Is that pretty much it for the
I
questions?
think that's okay.
Okay.
That wraps it up. Yeah.
Okay. CMAC, I have
Thank you, Siamak.
I have a question, and you just touched on it. I mean, I met you and David in 2014, first time at the REIC when you got your fellowship with the REIC, and I mean, you're an incredible partnership, and you just talked about you know, what partnerships are all about, and you've got an incredibly successful one. David has, you know, is quite incredible. One of our guys lives in his condominium at Young and Bloor, and he's on the line right now. And you know, talk a little bit about that relationship, because I think that is so important. It's a bit like a marriage, but more importantly, it's, you know, building a partnership and building a firm of you know, two people that, you know, work together. And I mean, your firm has incredible awards. You know, the Governor General Awards are incredible. You have international awards. You're successful. David is successful. Talk a little bit about the two of you and the success of your firm.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, Silvio, because, you know, I think differences are a strength. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think that people say, oh, you know, no, it's I think the fact that from the beginning we had enormous respect and frankly love for each other. I think I certainly feel a great deal of respect, and for David, that comes very easily. But it's not like you got to hold the pencil together, and you have to allow for the kind of the strengths of the different personalities to find expression within the same firm, and give lots of latitude, lots of trust. And I think that's what makes this a terrific practice. You know, there is nobody I lean on more than David during difficult times. And you want the firm to have that kind of strength and stability that it does by having this kind of breadth of resources and specializations, and you can easily find answers to your questions by asking around. You certainly explore really critical questions of making a practice, but you don't need to lose the art of the differences that happen between each of the people that are basically partners within the firm. And I think that this is a strength. I think that, as I said, the principle for the temple is this idea that unity is not sameness. Does that make sense, Silvio?
Yeah.
It's not sameness. And people think unity is sameness. No, in fact, it's not. It's quite the opposite. I think unity is actually through diversity. And I think what makes our practice really rich is the breadth of the exploration, the breadth of the questioning, and the depth of the specialization within each of the lanes that we're running. And it's not easy to do. It's not easy to do what David's doing, and he's absolutely doing the very best work in the country at what he's doing. And the best thing I can do as a partner is stay out of his way most of the time, and be as supportive as I can.
No, I totally agree with you. I mean, we've had our at NORR, we've had our own history, and I totally agree with you. It's you know, you can't be the same. It's you know, you have to do your own thing, and you have to excel at what you're doing. You know,
But there's definitely there is a certain soul within the practice, and people resonate within it, and they understand why they're there, and they understand how things fibrillate from one scale to the other, from one project to the other, from one exploration to the other. And you can feel that there's stuff that's happening that's bouncing around the office all the time, and that's what makes it a stronger practice.
Yeah.
And I think that this is too bad we haven't been in the same space, because you can feel it. You can feel how much is missing by that. And really, I feel really badly for the very young people, because they're the ones that really need to be in the practice and experience all of that energy, and as it moves around. And I'm looking forward to that coming back again, because really it's an exciting place when you have those kinds of differences, you know, ricocheting around, and you see the different questions, the different explorations, the different timelines, different pressures, the different kind of clients, all of that stuff creating this kind of energy within one practice.
I agree. Siamak, this has been a fantastic presentation. Falling backwards, it's we won't forget for sure. I want to sincerely thank you. We're honored that you did this, and it's I can't thank you enough. I also want to thank Elsa Lam for being with us, from Canadian Architect, Frank, and Andrew, and we're going to have you back because we have to. You're doing fantastic work, and you're a good friend of the firm, and we look forward to the future.
And
thank you very much.
Really, my thanks to you, Silvio, for you know, really genuinely, thank you for including us and me.
No, this was a very special one. Thank you very much. All the best.
Well, bye.
And thank you for everyone that was on the Zoom call today. All the best, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.